English language, free markets and capitalism, and ideals of equality. About a quarter say ideals of religious freedom, representative government, individualism, self-reliance, work ethic, and private property. Fewer say Christianity, multiculturalism, limited government, ideals of social tolerance, racism, greed, the arts, inequality, immigration, corruption, and sexism are most important. And they list these things in a strange way. I don't see how they came up with these lists. Anyway, Republicans and Democrats prioritize these features differently. Furthermore, Republicans think more of these features define American culture than do Democrats. For Republicans, the top 5 features are ideals of liberty, democracy, free markets and capitalism, the English language, and ideals of religious freedom. Democrats' top features are democracy, ideals of equality, ideals of liberty, ideals of religious freedom, and representative government. Republicans are about 20 points more likely than Democrats to say that capitalism and limited government are defining features of America, and are about twice as likely to say that self-reliance, private property, and Christianity define the nation. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to identify multiculturalism, ideals of social tolerance, and immigration as most important. These perceptions vary less by immigration background. Overall, immigrants and non-immigrants have similar views about what features define America. There are some differences. First-generation immigrants are about 10 to 15 points less likely than native-born Americans who are not second-generation immigrants to believe America is defined by ideals of liberty, self-reliance, ideals of religious freedom, and representative government. First-generation immigrants are more likely to say immigration is a defining feature. Perceptions among second-generation immigrants and other native-born Americans are very similar. 2 exceptions were noted. The second generation is about 10 points less likely to say that the English language and ideals of religious freedom are defining features compared to other native-born Americans who are not second-generation immigrants. Why do so many Americans prefer a country with an essential American culture and values that immigrants adopt when they arrive? Some may prefer more homogeneity or relatability in their community. The survey asked respondents how much they would prefer to live in a neighborhood where most people had the following in common with them. A plurality of respondents say they prefer a great deal to live in a neighborhood where people around them speak the same language, have similar values and sentiments, have similar customs and habits, celebrate the same holidays, and have similar political values as they. Fewer say they prefer a great deal to live in a neighborhood with neighbors who have similar religious beliefs or the same race or ethnicity as they. Thus, less than half of respondents say that any of these is of great importance to them. However, when also including the share of respondents who say these commonalities matter at least somewhat, or even a little, majorities of Americans agree. Americans differ in the extent to which they prefer these commonalities. Republicans are far more likely than Democrats to strongly prefer many of these potential commonalities. For instance, Republicans are about twice as likely as Democrats to greatly desire neighbors who speak the same language, 62 to 32%. To have similar values and sentiments, 44 versus 28. Have similar customs and habits, 38 versus 22. And celebrate the same holiday, 32 versus 16%. Although fewer overall, Republicans also are somewhat more likely than Democrats to greatly prefer neighborhoods where others share their political values, religious beliefs, or are the same race or ethnicity as they. However, when including the share of respondents who say these things matter at least a little, somewhat, or a great deal, partisan differences are less pronounced. For instance, about 9 in 10 Democrats and Republicans prefer at least a little to be in neighborhoods where people speak the same language, have similar values and sentiments, and similar customs and habits as they. About 8 in 10 also prefer at least a little to have neighbors who share their political values. Republicans are more likely than Democrats to care about their neighbors celebrating the same holidays and sharing religious beliefs. Both are about equally likely to at least slightly prefer neighbors being of the same race or ethnicity as they. Preferences for neighborhood sameness also vary somewhat with immigration background. Native-born Americans, who are not second-generation immigrants, are nearly 20 points more likely than first-generation or second-generation immigrants to greatly prefer that their neighbors speak the same language as they. First-generation immigrants are somewhat more likely than the third generation and higher to prefer neighbors who celebrate the same holidays and share political values and religious beliefs. First-generation immigrants also are about 3 times as likely to greatly prefer neighbors of the same race or ethnicity as they. Immigration restrictionists are more likely than expanders to greatly prefer having neighbors similar to themselves. However, the dimensions of preferred commonality vary. Hardcore restrictionists, those who want to decrease immigration a lot, are 58 points more likely than hardcore expanders, those who want to increase immigration a lot, to greatly prefer neighbors who speak the same language as they, 80% versus 22%. Hardcore restrictionists are also more likely than hardcore expanders to greatly prefer neighbors who share similar values and sentiments, customs and habits, and who celebrate the same holidays as they. However, restrictionists differ little from expanders on having neighbors with similar political values, or similar religious beliefs, or who are of the same race or ethnicity as them. So that kind of removes a bit of racism from the equation there, which is kind of interesting. These data suggest that Americans who have above-average preferences for neighborhood commonality and relatability are more likely to want to restrict immigration. 2/3 of Americans say speaking English is necessary in order to fully integrate into American society. Majorities across immigration background and partisanship agree. However, some groups feel more strongly about this than others. Majorities of first-generation immigrants, second-generation immigrants, and other native-born Americans, who are not second-generation immigrants, believe English fluency is necessary for integration in society. Majorities of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats also agree, but Republicans are much more universally in support. Democrats are divided between their very liberal, and moderate wings. 35% of very liberal Democrats believe English fluency is necessary, compared to 51% of liberal Democrats and 62% of moderate Democrats. Okay. Immigration restrictionists often raise concerns that immigration could undermine the political and economic institutions that allow the U.S. to be a prosperous country. Thus, the survey asked what respondents think are the main reasons the U.S. is considered a rich country to ascertain if immigrants and native-born Americans' views differ. However, immigrants and non-immigrants gave fairly similar answers. Partisans, however, have very different perspectives about what is responsible for the country's economic advancement. The top 5 reasons given for economic prosperity among all Americans are freedom, the free market system, the U.S. Constitution, democracy, property rights, and natural resources. Strong conservatives and liberals have dramatically different views about the reasons the United States is considered a rich country. Liberals tend to emphasize nefarious reasons such as oppression and exploitation of marginalized people and workers. Conservatives tend to focus more on political and economic institutions. A plurality of strong liberals say that oppression and exploitation of marginalized people is the main reason, as well as management's exploiting their workers. After that, about a third say the free market system and natural resources are primarily responsible, and about a quarter say democracy. In contrast, majorities of strong conservatives say that the U.S. Constitution and freedom are the main causes of economic success. About half say the free market system, a third say democracy, and a quarter say securing property rights are the primary causes of the nation's wealth. First-generation immigrants identify nearly the same top 5 reasons as all Americans for U.S. economic prosperity: democracy, freedom, the free market system, the U.S. Constitution, and natural resources. Different views by immigration background are slight in comparison to political differences. The differences that do exist include these. First-generation immigrants are about 10 points less likely than the third generation and higher to point to the U.S. Constitution, freedom, the free market system, and property rights as being primarily responsible. That's interesting. Okay. Attitudes about immigration may also vary according to a person's orientation and attachment towards the nation and the world. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, cosmopolitanism describes the belief that all human beings belong to a single community of world citizens. Nationalism appears to have many different definitions. Rich Lowry, in his book The Case for Nationalism, describes nationalism as a greater attachment to one's fellow citizens than to those outside of the country's borders, and a concomitant desire to elevate the interests of a nation's citizens above those outside of it. Both cosmopolitanism and nationalism can affect attitudes towards immigration policy. Furthermore, both approaches can be conducive to a more liberalized orientation to immigration, but the factors considered relevant and important will differ. Nearly 2/3 of Americans, 63%, say it's more important when making immigration policy to consider what benefits the United States and its current citizens. Another 37% believe it's more important to consider what benefits the most people, regardless of nationality. Priorities for U.S. immigration policy also correlate with preferred immigration levels. A majority of Americans who want to increase immigration want policymakers to first consider what benefits the most people, no matter where they were born. But majorities of those who want to maintain current levels or decrease immigration want immigration policy to prioritize American citizens and the United States first. A majority of Democrats feel immigration policy should primarily consider what benefits the most people, regardless of nationality. Conversely, 85% of Republicans and 61% of independents say immigration policy should elevate the interests of the U.S. and its citizens above others. These attitudes highly correlate with ideology as well. Fully 68% of strong liberals say U.S. immigration policy should benefit the most people regardless of nationality, while 88% of strong conservatives say immigration policy should consider U.S. interests first. This is really fascinating to me. I mean, I get on some level, I get why people say, U.S. first. Let's put ourselves first and then worry about everybody else. I get that up to a point. We all do live here, and what's good for us as a nation benefits everyone that lives here. I get that, and I think that's an important point to consider, but we're all citizens. I don't like using that word, but we're all members of the same world family in the sense that we're all humans on the earth. And as speaking universally or solar systemally or Milky Way-ally, or however you want to put it, we're all together. We're a group. And what benefits all of us, or the most of us, is the best policy, regardless. So I really have a hard time understanding nationalists and this notion that, um, U.S. first, America first. Let's put ourselves first. It seems to be a way of excusing greed and selfishness, really. I don't know. I don't have a huge point to make on it. It really boggles my mind. I don't understand that way of thinking. Or rather, I understand that way of thinking, but I don't understand how someone can maintain that over time and know and realize and understand how interconnected we all are. I mean, what hurts them over there hurts us over here, and what benefits everybody benefits everybody. It just, anyway, I'll give it up because I can't sort it out at this moment. Okay, views on this topic do not vary much by immigration background. First generation citizen immigrants are about as likely as second generation immigrants and other native born Americans to say U.S. immigration policy should put the United States and current citizens' interests first. 58% of strong liberals view themselves as global citizens. Well, that would be me. About a quarter of Americans view themselves more as a global citizen than a citizen of the United States. A plurality disagrees, and 26% aren't sure. Primary identification with the world or the nation correlates highly with beliefs about immigration levels. 61% of expanders who want to increase immigration a lot view themselves more as global citizens. In contrast, 79% of restrictionists who want to decrease immigration a lot view themselves more as citizens of the U.S. Those who want to keep immigration levels the same are about twice as likely to view themselves first as U.S. citizens than global citizens. So all of that fits exactly what you would imagine it to fit. Okay, attachment to global versus national citizenship also varies with political ideology and immigration background. A majority of strong liberals view themselves more as global citizens than U.S. citizens, compared to moderate liberals. Nearly 3/4 of conservatives disagree that they view themselves as global citizens. About half of first-generation immigrants say they view themselves more as global citizens than as citizens of the United States. This is more than twice the share of native-born Americans who are not second-generation immigrants who agree. Second-generation immigrants fall in between, with 33% who view themselves primarily as world citizens. Okay, this part was really interesting here. The survey took an unconventional approach to examining attachment to country and fellow citizens. Survey respondents were split into two groups. One group was asked if they feel a closer attachment to a person living in Jackson, Wyoming, or a person living in Paris, France, or if they feel about the same toward both. The second group was asked if they feel a closer attachment to a person living in Jackson, Wyoming, or a person living in Mexico City, Mexico, or if they feel about the same toward both. I think that is really weird. I guess they're going with that Europeans or non-Europeans thing. Anyway, the purpose of the question was to ascertain if a person feels more attachment to a stranger who resides within his or her own country's borders, or to someone outside the country, or if the person feels equally toward both. Jackson, Wyoming was selected because it's known but has a small population, and thus respondents are less likely to have personal friends and family in the area. Americans are divided, with about half saying they feel a closer attachment to a person in Jackson, and about half, 44%, saying they feel similarly attached to a person in Wyoming or Paris, and 10% saying they feel closer to someone in Paris. Similarly, 39% feel closer to a stranger in Wyoming, 51% feel equally close to someone in Mexico City or Wyoming, and 10% feel closer to someone in Mexico City. Immigration attitudes highly correlate with these attachments. In the first group, restrictionists are far more likely than expanders to feel attached to the American stranger. Indeed, expanders are more likely than restrictionists to feel the same towards both hypothetical Parisian and American strangers, or to feel closer to the Parisian stranger. A similar pattern is found among the second group. Restrictionists are far more likely than expanders to feel closer to an American stranger than a stranger in Mexico City. On the other hand, expanders are far more likely than restrictionists either to feel the same towards both or to feel closer to the Mexico City stranger. A majority of Democrats feel an equal connection to both the American-born and foreign-born strangers in both samples, whereas Republicans feel a stronger connection to American-born strangers. Feelings also vary by immigration background. For instance, the share who feel a closer attachment to a stranger in Wyoming than Paris are as follows: 35% among the first generation, 41% among the second generation, 45% among the third generation, and 50% among the fourth generation and higher. These results demonstrate that even when personal relationships are not considered, some Americans feel a stronger bond to their fellow Americans residing within their own country's borders. Others feel equally attached to strangers within their country and strangers outside their country, and then others feel a closer attachment to those outside of their country. Thus, borders are not as meaningful for those individuals when constructing their attachments to people outside their own social circle. How people form attachments to people they don't know on the basis of national boundary or not may influence their views on immigration as well. Even though many Americans do not have an ancestor directly involved in the nation's founding, a large majority of Americans feel a strong connection to the country's history and founding. The survey found that nearly two-thirds view America's history as their own history, and the founders of the United States as their forefathers. Although most Americans agree, their intensity of agreement differs. For instance, majorities of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans feel a connection to the country's history and founding, but Republicans feel a stronger connection. 65% strongly agree they view America's history as their own, compared to 35% of Independents and 22% of Democrats. Majorities of both first-generation immigrants and native-born Americans, who are not second-generation immigrants, think of America's history as their own. Second-generation immigrants are somewhat less likely to agree, but half do. Immigration restrictionists feel a closer bond with the nation's history. 82% think of America's history as their own, including 63% who strongly feel this way. Majorities of expanders and maintainers also see themselves as heirs to the country's history, but less intensely than restrictionists. Those who feel a deep attachment to the country's history may be more concerned about the potential for the U.S. to change and have a stronger desire than others share in this attachment. Stronger desire that others share in this attachment. It may also be a fear of change from the past. An overwhelming majority of Americans, 82%, say they are patriotic, including 45% who say they are very patriotic, and 37% who say they are somewhat patriotic. Another 12% say they are not very patriotic, and 6% feel not at all patriotic. Both majorities of Democrats and Republicans are patriotic. However, Republicans are more than twice as likely as Democrats to say they are very patriotic. These differences map onto immigration attitudes. While majorities of immigration expanders, maintainers, and restrictionists all view themselves as patriotic, intensity varies. About a third of immigration expanders view themselves as very patriotic, as do 38% of maintainers. In contrast, 60% of immigration restrictionists and 71% of hardcore restrictionists view themselves as very patriotic. Most Americans say being American is either extremely or very important to their identity. A quarter say it's moderately important to their identity, and 15% say it's not important. Republicans are about 25 points more likely than Democrats and independents to say their American identity is extremely or very important to them. A similar pattern is found by immigration attitude. People who want to decrease immigration to the United States are much more likely to feel a strong connection to their American identity. Immigration restrictionists, who want to decrease immigration a lot, are about twice as likely as expanders who want to increase immigration a lot to be extremely or very attached to their American identity. Taking intensity into account, 63% of hardcore restrictionists say this identity is extremely important to them compared to 20% of expanders, a 43-point difference. Immigrants are similar to Americans overall in an attachment to their American identity. A majority of first-generation immigrants, as well as 64% of third-generation and higher, feel extremely or very attached to their American identity. Second-generation immigrants are about 20 points less attached than other native-born Americans, with 45% who say their American identity is extremely or very important to them. Well, we're going to have to quit there and move on next week because there's just a lot more to go. Now, we're getting close to the end, but there's more to go, and I think it's important that we cover as much of it as possible because this is a really useful survey. And it helps us to understand why people feel as they do. I mean, it's very easy for people talking about this issue, like myself, for example, to just go, that's racist. And I really do feel that a lot of immigration restrictionists have some racism built in somewhere in their notions about immigrants, because otherwise there's no driving force for why they feel that people should not be allowed to come in here, or why they should be kept out. And that's been my experience. That's what I've seen. That's what I've read. That's what I've heard. And that's what I feel. But this survey definitely does offer some nuance to that and show, at least me, the error of my ways in just making blanket assumptions about people, because there are a lot of different reasons that aren't necessarily what people say they are. Like, I think immigrants cost too much or whatever. People always speak in economic terms, or often speak in economic terms, but their actual feelings are often based on other things. And clearly, those things are complex, and this is a complex issue. And I'm finding out a lot, and I hope you are too. And I'm glad that you were able to join us, and I hope you will again next week. And until then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.